my name's Kylie Melville. I'm a second-year PhD student based at Moray House. I'm also supervised cross-institutionally with the University of Birmingham. So today my presentation is going to be about how we can ethically and meaningfully include neurodivergent children and young people in educational research. So before I begin, I think it's really important for myself as the researcher to establish my positionality in relation to the communities that I work with and do research with. So I come from a biracial mixed neurotype family from Canada. I'm an educator turned researcher, so I've spent the past 8 years working in special education, both in mainstream, the special system, and also in the third sector as well. A lot of my students were autistic, part of the LGBTQIA+ community. My students were speaking as well as non-speaking, and the age range that I worked with was between 4 to 18 years of age. I also currently do research with underrepresented neurodivergent communities, including people living with obsessive compulsive disorder, developmental language disorder, and pervasive and multiple learning disability. So all of that hopefully will help me take a neuro-affirming approach to my research. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the term, neurodiversity is the natural neurocognitive variation among the human species. This is a definition taken from an autistic philosopher by the name of Robert Chapman, based at Durham University. And when I think about neuro-affirming research, I take the words from Chapman and other neurodivergent researchers from the UK and globally to mean that we are advocating for a unique space within the social model of disability to support people who are being marginalized by neuronormative society. And what I mean by that is that historically, and sadly still today, a lot of research on neurodivergent people is conducted with a deficit model lens. This means that they are being perceived and understood as lacking or less than or in need of fixing. So I'm part of the hopefully budding growing movement of researchers that instead looks at all of these people and all of their differences, meaning that they are just as capable and competent as anyone else. They are just different, not less. And this term also encompasses neurological and behavioral differences that are developmental as well as acquired. So an example of developmental neurodivergent condition, one of the most commonly heard would probably be autism, ADHD, dyslexia. By acquired, I mean people who have acquired brain injury, PTSD, dementia, so things that acquire and happen later on in life. So developmental means you are born with it, acquired means you acquire it later on in life. So no matter whether it's developmental or acquired, all of these differences are valued aspects of human flourishing. So when we think of neuro-affirming education research specifically, I think that neuro-affirming research should inform practices and policy, which makes schools a place where all staff and students feel not just accepted, but welcomed, celebrated, and supported, no matter what their neurotype or profile of need. And I also think there needs to be an emphasis of the importance of student voice and including student views in decision-making within education. And these decisions can happen from the bottom all the way to the top. But student voice is important and should be embedded at all levels. So, just a very brief overview of what my PhD research is looking into. So, my research topic was decided upon based on my experiences in teaching in England. And I worked in a special school where we had a sensory room. I put this in quotation marks because it was not actually a room. It was a disused broom closet that our heads of school were labeling as a sensory room for Ofsted inspection days. It was not fit for purpose, and it was not beneficial to the students or the staff at all. And I must have not have been the only educator to feel this frustration in the disjoint between what people say is happening in schools and what actually is happening in schools. So my PhD research is looking at how our multi-sensory environments, sensory rooms, are being designed and used with neurodivergent students, and I'm also looking at how their student voices are being implemented in the design and the use of these spaces. My research is also being supported by a lived experience advisory group comprised of 6 neurodivergent adults with lived experience of using these spaces in school to make sure that my research and all the outputs are community informed. So, I am based in the School of Education, but I come from an educational and developmental psychology background. And typically PhDs in these disciplines means that I need to conduct 2 to 3 studies part of my PhD. So I need to go through ethics at least 2 to 3 times throughout the whole length of it. So these are just some of the key takeaways I thought would be useful for some of you when you're thinking about ethically including these students into your research. You have to absolutely adhere to all ethical guidelines. This will include the ethics committee of Moray House. If you're doing an applied psychology project like me, you would also need to adhere to the ethical guidelines by the British Psychological Society. If you're doing educational research in Britain, you also need to adhere to the guidelines by BERA. If you're working with children and young people, you also need to adhere to guidelines by ERIC. And an important note, if you're going to try and recruit from schools in Scotland, you also require getting research access permission by the local authority of the school and where it's operating in. So these are all the different things you need to take into account, and it was definitely a learning curve for me because I didn't have to get research access through local authorities when I did my research in England. This is an additional layer of protection that Scotland schools do. You also need to think very carefully about data protection, so adhering to GDPR, making sure that all of your participants are aware that the University of Edinburgh has a guideline where all data collected may be stored in data store for a minimum of 10 years. You need to make that very clear, and you need to make sure that all of your participants consent to this specific aspect. And it's also heavily encouraged that all PhD researchers also create data management plans, which can be adapted throughout your PhD journey, but it's a good document to have on side as well. And I think the core objective with doing ethics well means that you've ensured all participants understand what your project is about and what it's trying to achieve. So it needs to be clear, concise, and in the case of a lot of neurodivergent people, most likely multimodal, because learning information via text only or only via spoken word may not be the most effective way to communicate this. So consider multimodal approaches as well. And this point here, very much influenced by my time working in education, you should work with people who know the child and young person well. This is because, as several presentations have already established today, you coming in as the researcher, you are an outsider. You may not know the specific nuances of these children and young people, so working with people that do know the child and young person well can help you catch maybe the signs that you couldn't catch. Signs of disengagement, signs of wanting to withdraw, signs of how to make them feel most comfortable to engage. So working as a team is very important. And I guess when it comes to meaningful participation, I like to think that we will always assume competence. So just because a child might be autistic, we don't want to assume that they cannot participate for any number of reasons. All children and young people have the right to share their opinions and have their voices heard, so we will assume they are able to participate, and if they do need support to understand how to participate, we then come in and make those adjustments for them. And meaningful participation must be informed by the child's strengths and preferences. So as the researcher, you need to be prepared to adapt, have an open mind, and also challenge your own preconceptions or biases. So engaging in that reflexive dialogue with yourself. And I like to think that even though we are people, our presence can be very crucial into creating safe spaces. So if you position yourself as being a safe space, this means that you're proactively and actively listening, you tap into the child or young person's rhythm. It's not you trying to get them to change to you, you come in and see where they take you. And I think don't be afraid of silence. That can be just as telling as what they are saying. And also your very presence can be a factor. So like looking at your body language, where you are in position to them, the people that they care about, if you're interviewing them in a classroom, for example, knowing that your very presence in there can be a factor to help them engage or disengage. And I think fundamentally it's built on trust. trust takes a lot of time to build and it's very easy to break. So as a researcher, you need to be patient. Establishing rapport should be a priority, and also be honest. So if the child or young person isn't sure of what their contributions mean, they have any questions, be honest and transparent with them about what their participation in your project means. So these are just some examples of tools I've used in my PhD research so far, and I will then go into an example from my master's research as well. But this is a research passport, and I like to think of it as a creative and engaging way to figure out how can this child or young person feel safe and empowered to participate in my project. So there are a couple of research institutes that have templates online. So I based my template off the Center of Research, Autism and Education from UCL, but I adapted the template to suit my needs. So it would have a place for the child or young person to put their name, spaces to talk about the things that they like, the things that they don't like, how they like to communicate with you, and also when it comes to working together, how can the child or young person communicate to you that they want to stop, they need a break, something needs to change for this interaction to continue, and also just thinking about when they do need a break, what are the things that you can do to support them, and also just a space where they can draw or write or have someone help them fill in about things that can help them feel relaxed. I also highly recommend having an easy read version of your information and consent forms. Using visual aids can be very helpful. So I include my picture so they can see who it is they'll be engaging with. I try to find appropriate visuals that match the topic. And you always match the text with an associated picture. And again, using as accessible language as possible, try to avoid jargon, what you're gonna do at the end, and obviously asking at the very end, is this all okay, to make sure. So what does this look like in action? I'll use the data analysis from my master's project for this part because I'm still waiting to get ethical approval for the second phase of my PhD research. So in my master's research, I looked at how autistic students experience Lego-based therapy, which is a school-based intervention that seeks to strengthen social communication skills using Lego bricks in guided play. And these were my own students that I was working with at the time, and I gave them the option to share their experiences with me alone, in a group, in a pair. They could play while they talked to me. So a lot of them opted to play with Lego while they spoke to me. And some didn't want to play, so those two students there, they just would rather just sit and talk to me face to face. And figures 7 and 8 are building, collaborative building situations with students who had an additional speech and language need. So they didn't say anything per se, but just seeing how they were building and engaging with me as I asked them these questions was very meaningful. And I'll just draw your attention to what I think is a very meaningful interaction that came out of this project. So this student who you can see in this image, they were autistic, they had global developmental delay, and they also had a speech and language need. And historically, researchers have thought that autistic people are incapable of engaging in pretend play sequences and that they have poor imagination. But as you can see by the transcript of the interview we had together, this student is clearly engaging in pretend play, is clearly using their imagination to build this mini world with their Lego. And I think that was partly only possible because he felt safe to share this with me. I was a safe space, we knew each other well, the rapport was there, and he was able to show me something that historically research has said is not possible. So I think when we think about ethical and meaningful participation, I think this is one of the most powerful things that can come out of that. It's where the children and young people can actually change everything we know just by being themselves. So, key takeaways. Firstly, neurodivergent children and young people, like all children and young people, have so much to share. And as the researchers, it is our duty, it's not optional, it's our duty to create engaging, empowering, and accessible ways for their expression. Communication comes in all sorts of different forms, and we need to go in and be ready to listen in whatever form that looks like. We need to be adaptable, open-minded, and willing to challenge our own biases and preconceptions. And I think when we're doing research in schools, as an example, schools are often, portrayed. They are places of learning, no doubt, but they are so much more than that. They're places of connection, opportunity, discovery, but I think most importantly, belonging, because no student will be ready to learn if they don't feel like they belong there first. So if we can keep all of these things in mind when we do research with these students in particular in education, again, I just think they can show us that there's more to them than historical research has said. Thank you very much.